Inquiries. Number 1, Senator Omidvar.
Thank you, Speaker. Colleagues, I am pleased to launch an inquiry into the link between Canada's past, present, and future prosperity and its deep connection to immigration. And I am particularly pleased that my colleagues from all the various groups in the Senate will be joining me in this. And I know that they will include senators who have lived experience either as first or second generation immigrants, but also others, as I make the case that links Canada, nation building, and immigrants together. Let me start with the journey through yesterday and today to tomorrow. Imagine this is 1896. Canada is a young nation. Its population is a mere 3.6 million people. On July 11th, Sir Wilfrid Laurier becomes Canada's Prime Minister, and one of his big promises is to settle the Western prairies with immigrants who will farm, harvest, and secure the West. This comes not only from a desire to grow and thrive, but also from a lingering fear that without people in the West, Canada is vulnerable to the growing might and spread of the U.S. Sir Clifford Sifton, Minister of the Interior, is charged with turning that promise into reality. He does so with remarkable foresight and success, multiplying many-fold the number of immigrants. And under his watch, more than 3 million people, almost double the size of the population at that time, arrive in Canada largely from continental Europe. Brings in cold weather farmers because the West is cold. Brings in Ukrainians, Scandinavians, Romanians, Doukhobors, Mennonites, and many others. But there is an outcry that these immigrants, not from Great Britain, not from the US, do not share the values and culture of Canada of the day. Sir Sifton defends his position by extolling the virtues of, quote, stalwart peasants in sheepskin with a stout wife and a half-dozen children, who could not only withstand the extremes of weather, but turn these vast tracts of land into prosperous farming communities. History, of course, tells us he was right. They turned into successful farmers and Canadians, but also into nation builders. But as always, there is nuance. Canadian history, as we know, complicated. Sir Sifton's vision, to settle the West came at the expense of the original inhabitants, the indigenous peoples, who continue to experience the impact of that decision till today. Let's fast forward to present times. Today, Canada has one of the most robust immigration systems in the world. This is not just grounded in the support by Canadians for immigration, but also reflected in the machinery of government. We in Canada have a Department of Immigration. We have a Minister of Immigration, as opposed to a department within another ministry, as do the US. In the US, it is the Department of Homeland Security, or in the UK, which is a Department of the Interior, or even in progressive Germany. We have clear criteria which continue to evolve, change, and improve. We invest in integration in all 3 levels of government. It is a system that I describe as high touch and generally delivers against the policy objectives of the day. Whilst the system is not perfect, it has earned the admiration of the globe. The OECD has signaled to the world that Canada's system is the best, indeed the gold standard, and worthy of emulation. As the rest of the world descends into a particular kind of populism and nativism, we stand out as an exception. As for the immigrants themselves, it's not easy. From my own experience, I can share that my biggest challenges were A, struggling to cope with the weather, and I admit I continue to struggle with that, and B, learning and navigating the rules and norms of the Canadian personality. There are many rules. The written ones are easy to understand and obey. It is those unwritten rules that are really difficult to navigate. And if I had the time, I could tell you some funny stories. But regardless, we are encouraged to keep our eyes on the prize. We must work hard. We know that even if our lives will be difficult, our children will largely succeed. I do not want to sanctify immigrants. We are like most other people. Some are good and some are bad. Some work hard and some are downright lazy. But in the aggregate and over time, immigration has been incredibly good, both for Canada and for the immigrants. That story is best seen in the campuses of our universities, in the small businesses owned and operated by families of immigrants across the country, in their representation in the ranks of professionals in our country, in their keen, deep interest and participation in the politics of our country. Most immigrants will choose to become citizens as soon as they are able. But one of the most striking indicators of success is home ownership. Today, 1 in every 5 homes in Canada is bought by an immigrant. Even refugees, who typically lag behind in success indicators for obvious reasons, buy homes at a faster pace than Canadians, with a full 65% putting down their money after 10 years in Canada. And mind you, these are refugees. Another incredibly positive indicator is that the wage gap between immigrants and their Canadian counterparts has never been smaller. And then there is entrepreneurship. Immigrant-owned firms create more jobs and have higher growth than businesses with owners born in Canada. From 2003 to 2013, companies owned by immigrant entrepreneurs accounted for a full quarter of all net new jobs created in the private sector, while representing a mere 17% of the context. In Toronto, city of immigrants, I have watched this narrative play out in real time. Whole industries have been saved or created by immigrant entrepreneurs, with cluster economies developing along family and ethnic lines. The Korean-dominated corner stores, the Iranian pizza chains, the Somali-run Dollaramas, and of course the overwhelming presence of Punjabis in the airport security and the limo industry. And even if they will stand behind counters, serving their customers, we know from evidence that their children will overwhelmingly go to university and become scientists, doctors, and lawyers. I would be failing my objective if I did not share with you not just the good, and I can do that for a very long time, but also to be completely fair to our deliberations, the bad and the ugly. Our system is good, but it can always improve. Successive governments have improved it in different ways. The Conservatives under Minister Kenny reformed the way the immigration queue is managed. The Liberals have just come out with a proposal to invest municipalities, mayors, local chambers of commerce, local community groups to nominate an immigrant so they can have the immigrants they need in their communities, as opposed to senior levels of government deciding that. I think we have also benefited from some happy accidents. The accident of our geography is one of those happy accidents, but we have experienced a so-called Trump bump. This is the foreign students who are now streaming into Canada, contributing more than $12 billion to our economy, and the highly skilled workers in STEM who are leaving Silicon Valley and choosing to work and live in Canada. There is, however, one problem that is particularly difficult to resolve, and that is the inability of many educated and experienced immigrants from gaining entry into their professions. The Conference Board of Canada has estimated that this costs our economy $6 billion a year. I have worked for more than 25 years in trying to find a resolution, and all I can say is that if we could find a way, perhaps here in the Senate, to propose solutions to the sticky wicket, imagine what this country could do with that extra money. Another challenge is Canada's failure to spread immigrants across our country so that we are truly a vast multicultural country as opposed to 3 or 4 diverse cities. We need people and their work to grow and stabilize the population of mid-sized and rural communities, and not just MTV. But there are signals of hope. I am encouraged by the results of a pilot that has taken place in the Atlantic, which has been successful in not just attracting, but retaining immigrants. And just like Minister Sifton did in settling the West, we come full circle again. Everything old is new. Perhaps not cold weather farmers this time, but cold weather technicians and technologists. From the good and the bad, let me turn to the truly ugly. Racism, both individual and systemic, keeping immigrants who are Black at the lowest levels of income, and denying people interviews and jobs merely because they have a foreign-sounding name is truly a difficult thing for me to grasp in today's Canada. Research confirms that bias is deeply rooted into our collective psyches. There is a cost to racism, in particular the cost borne by victims. But the greatest cost, I believe, is the cost to our collective national soul. From yesterday and today, let me peek with you into tomorrow. By 2035, 15 years from now, if immigration is kept at current levels, our absolute population will begin to decline. Also, by 2035, the dependency ratio, which is the ratio of working people versus retired people, will require more and more people to work and pay for the upkeep of senior citizens. Let me make this a little real for you. In 1971, there were roughly 13 Canadians who were working to support 100 senior citizens. By 2046, we will need 40. From 13, we will need 40 Canadians to support 100 senior citizens. In addition, our labour market will continue to experience shortages, even if you factor in the upcoming disruption through AI and the gig economy. We will need workers at all ends of the scale, from scientists and professors to tradespeople, and yes, we will need those caregivers. Immigration and immigrants will continue to be a part of the solution, not the only solution. They will be a part of the solution to thrive, grow, and prosper. So yes, we have a successful system, but I am not sure that we are able to look far enough into the future to help us prepare effectively and in time. I want to close with an acknowledgement of the relationship between the only 2 demographic groups in our country whose share in the population is growing. That is Canada's immigrants and Canada's Indigenous peoples. There is this huge emotional, cultural, economic, and spatial distance between us. And I've always thought, I've always embraced Canada's history as a complex, convoluted one. It is made up of many parts, and some of them are moving at the same time. And it seems to me that this history is told back to us differently. The First Peoples' history, the history of colonization, the history of bilingualism, the history of the coming together of Canada, the history of the immigrant peoples of Canada, but nowhere do all of these narratives converge. And especially, colleagues, they do not converge in the classrooms of our country. On this point, I believe that amending the citizenship oath to include a reference to Indigenous history is an appropriate first step, and I look forward to the retabling of the bill on this matter soon. As an immigrant, and I will speak for myself, I knew very little of the history of the colonization of the Indigenous people in Canada, and it only became clear and apparent to me many years later. I accept wholeheartedly, therefore, former Governor-General Adrian Clarkson's observation about new citizens. When we become citizens of Canada, all its glories and all its shame accrue to us. We share in its history and cannot pick and choose the parts that suit a particular narrative. I look forward to the thoughts of my colleagues on this inquiry and hope that by the end of our deliberations on immigration and prosperity in Canada, we may well come to a common understanding, not just of the potential, but also of the challenges and creative solutions. Thank you very much.
Sorry, Senator. Question? Senator Omidvar, you take a question?
Of course, Chair.
Okay.
Senator Omidvar, I want to compliment you on the vision of doing this inquiry. I believe in a place like this, it's really important that we have the difficult discussion, because we are supposed to be protecting minorities. And I was listening to you very carefully, and you spoke so eloquently about the contribution that immigrants make, and also you spoke about racism. The constant question for your and my grandchildren is, will they ever belong? Because they're still asked, where do you come from? They don't know another home. They don't know another place. And you, who are an expert on those issues, will they ever belong?
Did she have first? I'm sorry. Time has expired. You asking for 5 more minutes to answer the question?
Less than 5, Chair.
Okay. Agreed, honourable senators? Agreed. Senator Omidvar.
Thank you, Senator Jaffer, for that question. My children are young Canadians, like yours are too. I'm an optimist. My family name, Omidvar, in Persian means hope. So I will always see the cup half full. I believe that over time, diversity will be normalized in Canada. It will become normal to look like you and me, or some version of you and me, because our children marry and intermarry. And if there is another positive indicator that I can talk about, it is the level of interracial relationships in big cities. They are rising steadily, and I think there is a whole brave new world out there. And if I may diverge a little bit, I always say, if nothing else works, love and sex will conquer all.